Як не провтикати дані у вашому кластері?
How to avoid losing data in your cluster, on the cluster itself. We have Stanislav Kalinkin from SoftServe and Igor Horoshenko from EPAM. You're welcome. Welcome everybody. As you know, we will be talking about threats related to Kubernetes and why have we joined you here, because we have quite interesting experience we'd like to share with you. And now, how did we get to this subject? We thought that we have to catch those threats, to look for them every day, to share that information and to patch some holes as soon as possible. But in our mind, it did look like that, but in most cases it may actually look a bit different. Because it's difficult for people to grasp some information. I have been faced with security issue when working with a Kubernetes-based project, and there was a HIPAA audit within that project, and there are many things which I realized back then, and I was faced with these things, and I was shown why we haven't passed that audit successfully. After that, I started paying attention to these things and sharing my experience with friends and colleagues and present at conferences. And most interestingly, after each and every conference, you tell people about something, you show practical cases, how things were hacked, what are the fine nuances, why did it happen, and so on. But after that, there are only few people who start changing something and paying attention to some things. And since Kubernetes has been becoming ever more popular, the issues have been ever more relevant nowadays. So, our presentation is structured in such a way that we'll tell you a bit about the history, how did we get to this point, and this is one of the first parts. Previously and now, monolithic applications were used. It's like one big application running on some server, and we know for sure that that application works on this server. We know which ports to open, how to check it, what to open, and so on. However, when people started switching to microservices, containers, Dockers, we have been getting more and more components to our application, and all those components have been talking to each other using REST API, often over the network, and there is network interconnection, and there are more and more components. They are scaled up. They may be working in different nodes. Nodes are creating dynamically, so you have to open ports. How to check, how to implement those checks, how to check our infrastructure. The infrastructure is growing, and the number of components is growing. So, then when we got microservice, we would deploy on one node, then we get more of those. There are additional nodes, and you have to manage all these things. And there are orchestrators like Kubernetes and Docker Swarm, which made our life a bit easier, but still we have to control these things, like which ports to open, where, how to open them. And after that, nowadays there is a trend towards multi-cloud, when there are so-called cloud-agnostic situations, because now when we deploy our solution to some particular cloud, to one cloud, the new trend is that we should not be dependent on any one cloud, so that we would be able to easily migrate to Azure, to AWS, and so on. And each and every case has their own fine nuances about security. You have to understand those. The world is changing, and we are getting to a situation where we have to distribute resources in an organized way. Previously we would have some hardware and monolithic application. Now we would restrict somehow those environments and applications. Now you may see thousands of applications on any one server, and they would be relatively protected if you do things in the right way. Containers and serverless things, serverless features have appeared, and they will be used over some period of time. And currently, on the one hand, those functions make it easier to deploy the code. We don't have to think anymore how to assemble it. There's this code, and we have to deploy it, and it's deployed through a cloud provider, and you get rid of some of the tasks, but still you have to think about security. Is anybody able to get access to those resources, and so on, and cases like that. Here and now we will be sharing links to presentations and people for whom we have great respect and we do value their contribution to educating more people and spreading their ideas. Switching from monolithic applications to containers. Arhan, who presented at Kyberton in 2018, he would be able to tell you better about these things. Currently, there has been a number of orchestrators of containers like Kubernetes, Mesos, Diffuse, Swarm, Rancher using the same Kubernetes, and Amazon ECS. There are Kubernetes management services like GKS, AKS, and so on. They make our life easier, and we just say we want to get a Kubernetes cluster in 3 minutes, and you get in GK that Kubernetes cluster with ready-made configuration. Indeed, we will not have access to master node, but here in this picture you see master node showed in blue, and we don't have access to that master node. It's managed by Google itself. All the other things, all the other nodes where our containers are running, we can enter them, we can see them, we can even change something there. But this is a nice case because you see that the whole infrastructure is being managed by Google itself, or say AWS, or AWS and so on. There are updates and fixes, and in JK they can be applied automatically, dynamically. And again, in JK I say I want to have this network policy. I set that check mark and that option in cloud, and network policy is on. When you deploy your own Kubernetes cluster, you have to have better knowledge to set up these things. How to generate certificates for those nodes, how to set up network policies, how to set these things up in such a way that cloud metadata from our containers would be intercepted, and there would be no access from containers to get metadata through a provider. This is one of the cases where we can enter the container with Carol, get metadata including cloud and NetScript and initialization token, and then we go along that chain. And in JK you just set up one check mark. It's not about the management service. You just have to do it on your own. Maybe we are talking a bit too fast, but after a conference, if you have any questions, we will tell you in more detail about these things. In this picture, we would like to show threats around public clouds about your environments. Here we can see that there are different types of attacks. For example, your data storage, your users, and computing resources you own are subject to those attacks. What to do about your cloud? Yeah, we'll talk about it in under defense. To get the general picture, we look at this report of this year where a couple thousand people were interviewed, and most concerns were about security for Kubernetes and containers as such, and only 7% of people are currently sure that their infrastructure is in good working order, and that's why they're here. Why Kubernetes? Kubernetes is currently becoming a standard for among orchestrators on the global scale. There was a huge number of deployments. It has huge community, and it has been developing in a dynamic way. And respectively, more and more people have been using it, have been deploying it. Some people deploy it on their own, some of them use management services. And the key problem is when people deploy their own Kubernetes cluster without understanding what exactly they are doing. It looks like this slide. Like tonight you're told, tomorrow morning we have to have a Kubernetes cluster for us to be able to use it. Yeah, we open documentation, how to deploy it. We deploy it using some options, but nobody thinks about security issues. Also, nobody thinks about and nobody sees general picture about what are security controls by and large to be monitored, to be changed and corrected any time you have any changes made to your infrastructure. It was relevant in 2018, it is still relevant now, and it will remain relevant because not many experts nowadays are able to properly deploy the infrastructure. Environments exposed, it's about 21,000 of those. It's easier to check that information with any public search engine. By the way, how many of you are aware what Shodan is? Yeah, raise your hand. Yeah, just interesting. Yeah, every year we see more and more people aware of that. 95% of those environments are exposed to the big world, and it's possible to get even more information there, and they're mostly hosted on AWS, and most of them are not properly configured because people set them up on their own without using self-management services provided by providers. The very first Kubernetes cluster was on Google. It was JK, so it has broader functionality, it has more people using it. But on the other hand, AWS Cloud appeared earlier, and it's still quite popular, and people are using AWS to deploy their own Kubernetes cluster. 1 year ago, ECS was not managing Kubernetes cluster, and people were using KEOPS or other tools to set up their own Kubernetes cluster. So, how to update Kubernetes cluster, how to monitor the Kubernetes cluster, to monitor updates and proper settings. And the key problem here, seen by most people who used it in production, is about security. We already mentioned Shodan. Shodan is a public search engine which allows you in real time to see services exposed to the big world, to the external world. And you can connect to them, and you can get unauthorized access to the system, and you should be very careful about it. Speaking about compromised services, it was discussed by Neil Warfield at last year's DEF CON, and he showed tables used by attackers and researchers to check that your infrastructure has been hacked, and you have to do something about it. But as you can see, these are test environments, development environments. Sometimes whole databases are wiped, so people get problems with recovering their data. He works as a researcher for Azure, and he showed that about 2 million ports within that Azure infrastructure is exposed to the external world. And looking at these trends, you can see WannaCry example to see that the number of vulnerable Windows OS instances has been lower now, but it takes a long time. How data leak from there? Anybody can see scripts to see that their financial data, credit cards data, to dump the database, to completely wipe the database. It's very easy to do it, and it's terrible to think about what can happen to your data, by and large. So it's not worth using production data in your test environments, in your development environments. They should be marked as be careful, and how to work with sensitive data. Your compliance people, your compliance teams should be able to tell you what to do with sensitive data. As an example, I often saw situations within the projects when people are saying, yeah, we have a problem, we have to understand why do we have this problem and to do something about it. And developers would just take some piece of the database, they would put it into their local copy of Elasticsearch or MongoDB or another database, another DBMS, but you have to work it. Port forwarding is not convenient, or using telepresence for connection forwarding is not convenient. So what people do, they would create a service within Kubernetes with type load balancer type, they get public IP, they access it using public IP. Yeah, you can use it from the comfort of your home because I opened the database until the evening, and then okay, I had lots of tasks I haven't finished, so I work over a week, and during that time Shodan or other systems would check you and understand what's going on, and maybe somebody would download your data. And quite often in Elasticsearch, people put data there, and then you have to use Expat to set authorization, so they put data there without any authorization. So you have to generate a test data set. You should spend some time to use your test data set. There are some open source solutions whereby it's quite easy to do it, but you should be careful about it. California Privacy Act and GDPR are covering security and improving it somehow, and now there have been various fines for companies who suffer from data leakage, but the general situation with awareness as such, with information awareness and security awareness, has been a bit better. An interesting example here is we had this example where we deployed MongoDB honeypots to see how long it will take for people to take it down. When will we get a message that we hacked your database? Yeah, it happened this way. In one day we saw that some researchers connected to our database, and at their website we didn't have any information on their website who they are and what they do with that data, but they have been doing it since 2004. In 10 days we had been indexed by Shodan, and we had become publicly available over Shodan, which has now been used about 2 million people, various people on the global scale. And in 17 seconds after that, immediately after that, somebody from China, from Chinese IP address, connected to us and wiped whatever we had there. Generally, you can see in your logs certain IP addresses and what you can do to avoid your data being compromised. Well, you have to do that lookup. There is this relatively good example because Banarish is just a search system. You can use this gray noise deployed by one of the researchers on their own. We'll see activities from that IP address on the global scale to compare facts and skip this risk as such. Companies which just scan something and sell information, there are more than 10 of those currently. The case which is a bit worse is this, where that IP address is hosted on Amazon, and based on the activities you see that they have only been scanning Kubernetes service as such. Then you start using a more powerful threat intelligence tool, and it says that it doesn't have any relevant and up-to-date information, and you have to skip it and to accept those risks and look through logs and to see whether your data have leaked to somebody or not. It's much better when you are able to use honeypots to monitor the activities. For example, now using the same engine, we have seen that there are about 65 IP addresses on a daily basis trying to look for Kubernetes clusters. The same applies to Docker daemons, using which you can just connect somewhere and to launch some malware container, malicious container, wherever possible. More iterations of the Docker daemon, and there are about 30 IP addresses daily trying to do it. Some articles, some publications about how to scan the whole world, about the service, how to collect the information required, and those articles have been publicly available since 2017. Anybody can do it. So now, how to live in this situation, how to check that your infrastructure is still somehow secure.
So how should we live? It may seem complicated. You should either leave your job or start studying and using best practices. Start improving yourselves and investing in your infrastructure at any stage. Never forget security, even when you just prepare your infrastructure. and at the same stage. This is a short roadmap to improve your security. First of all, restrict access over to Cube KTI to limit connections. Then, to use private Kubernetes cluster, use access control, role-based access control, creating the database for roles and resources accessible for such or other users. But this is not all. Your containers may operate at the same node but communicate over the network. Thus, you should use a network policy by means of the right network plugin. If you deployed Kubernetes cluster with plugin not supporting the network policy, it will be difficult to upgrade your infrastructure. Think in advance. Use namespaces and split your flows, your applications, instructions and so on by namespace. Create team A and team B and set up policies and quotes, setting quotes of public IPs and resources for every namespace. Isolate them. Use Bootstrap TLS node. Make your nodes communicate over TLS. At the next stage, we go to Kubernetes security and updates. You should constantly update Kubernetes, and Google Kubernetes engine is good in the sense that the updates are issued regularly and they are deployed regularly, and Google would inform you about this. In GK, for instance, the dashboard is already switched out, docking is switched out, but if you deploy Kubernetes yourself, so this service token may be available, and it allows somebody to use container to access your Kubernetes cluster. Use minimum operating system without any excesses. A good example is GCP with operation system or core operation system container. Use minimal IAM rules, deploy the private cluster on your nodes. JKA allows you to create private Kubernetes cluster, meaning that there is no IPs, public IPs at your node. It was a disadvantage of using public IP at each node. Now it's not so anyway. Verify binaries that are deployed and monitor access with audit logging. As soon as we got Kubernetes cluster, disable dashboard. It's not necessary. Use command prompt, disable default service account token, protect node metadata that I mentioned. Just imagine we entered your container somehow, made a request and got a script that was used to deploy that node, but after that we can search for another information, but JKA allows you to disable this. When you use self-deployment Kubernetes cluster, set it up so that metadata cannot be accessed from the outside. Scan images for vulnerabilities. And the last stage is the pod security policy, preventing impact of microservice compromise, protect secrets, and limit the identity used by pods. Remember that you should not skip any stage or part of this work. There is an article being regularly updated about Kubernetes attack, but a regular picture is like this. Everybody will reach for low-hanging fruit, being access control or traffic sniff between the containers, all things like this.
Близько 15 атак описав Бред Гісман.
A dozen and a half attacks have been described by Brad Gisman, and this is an example. Access a vulnerable container to access the node and all its resources. At one of the OWASPs I have shown how to get into the container using your application as an access point. Then you get metadata updated and use AWS with your own token or SSH key to update the metadata and give you access. It's possible whenever you get into container. Now, which is the right way to protect yourself? I can cite a great presentation by Gunjan Patel, who splits the security or breaks down the security to 7 levels, and he gives a roadmap for each level, works to do to be sure that you protect your data. Yes, it's a lot of additional work, but it can help you to change something. This example is about securing the build. What I would recommend is to check images for vulnerabilities. There were many cases when dubious images were used containing backdoors. Use your own registry container and put only your own images there, made from scratch or verified. Be very careful about this. Kubernetes allows you to limit access to other registries by the use of Docker-D, stating that some repositories are trusted, signing images for being used, but be very aggressive and very careful about this. Because the problem of images containing backdoor or malware is more and more relevant. Use private repositories signed with your certificate and limit public registry containers in Kubernetes. When you validated all your changes, you will want to check your cluster for security, but describe the scope, which is really important, because without this you will get gobbled results. This can be applicable to your infrastructure. This is one of the recent cases. Sorry, the interpreter cannot hear. So they hacked the container, then got to dashboard, took secrets, decrypted, took keys, connected to database and started mining. This is an example of taking a script image comprising malware to be capable of mining and grow the botnet. You can use your monitoring to see that there is more than one container with your application. If you don't pay any attention to this, it may signify that you have somebody mining in your containers. Check your images. What is the proactive protection? Use automation as the proactive security. Put a so-called topic in the demilitarized zone to limit people from scanning your services and overload their servers.
Дуже гарний кейс supply chain атак.
This is a good case about supply chain attacks, but this is another slide. Docker Hub is the repository for people for storing the images or using the publicly available images. We tried to find out is there any malware in the repositories. Is actually Docker Hub is used by the criminals to initiate and grow attacks. We found out that in May some repositories
Близько 7 місяців
contained the images for mining, and it took 7 months for researchers to describe this case and make it known. But Docker Hub did not delete this repository. After that, Fortinet has described this case again, and it took another 2 days for Docker Hub to delete these malicious images. We cannot say what harm has been actually done, but we think that the losses were like $100,000, but attackers made about $90,000 by exporting more than 5 million images from Docker Pub.
ще веселіше.
After that, it was another story with Docker Hub. 3 weeks ago, somebody
Знаходять в вільному доступі.
had unauthorized access to their database and leaked about 5% of the users' data. Docker Hub stated that there were not financial data exposure, but tokens were exposed, and this resulted in losses. As you know, containers would use a host kernel, and there were cases when the container have been used to go out of the container and get access to a host system. It's a recent case. The container allowed to go outside and do something on the host system, and after that the access to the host system allows you to do many different things. It was a vulnerability fixed in 18.9. It was not the first case of the kind, but you know, there is no silver bullet to protect everything, because your needs depend on the things you are doing in your environments. You can try and spend money on protection, but the security control require not only money but the time to do it. But there are expensive products with additional overhead, and they can be built in as like sidecar proxy into your containers, but anyway, you cannot cover everything, and there is no single solution to resolve all your problems. Just choose the medium way, use different products to resolve different problems. It may happen that the protection services would consume more resources than your application. You also can try and use open source utilities to close the gaps and use a small volume of resources. There are, for instance, Microscanner and Cube Hunter to get a look on images and exposure of your infrastructure to the world, and you can get also Kubebench for the verification of your controller by the tools of SIS-20 using the best practices.
Як додаткова міра заходу
One more protection tool
можете також
for you.
спробувати.
You can try and participate in bug bounty program and initiate a bug bounty program in your company. For instance, through Sudan, I found a case where the Kubernetes dashboards would be publicly open, and I tried Cube Hunter to find out that there are 120 nodes like this.
Технология DevOps, да, но трендом 2019 года будет DevSecOps.
We also have DevOps technology to do this. I think that the developers should have some knowledge about the security and be capable of using the tools to verify your infrastructure security. This will be a 2019 trend, and willy-nilly DevOps will have to study cybersecurity. And you also should validate all the solution design stage for security.
Додаткові міри, які
And some additional measures to take to spend time and resources for your people development and carry out security trainings, which is nothing new but necessary. One of the cases that can help you to improve security is using service mesh. And ISTIO, supported by Google and other big internationals, is one of the examples of such service mesh. It has its advantages like monitoring traffic or close the traffic, outbound traffic, encrypt traffic, mutual TLS integration with adapters like API Gateway, JWT, but its disadvantage is a huge overhead because the card proxy is added to each of your containers plus control plane plus difficulty of configuration and troubleshooting. This is a picture which we have thanks to Vadim about compliance, and you can use Kubebench to verify the security level. Elasticsearch. There are an expert model which you can buy to get authorization and breaking down by indexes, but it's great before your license expires. After that, Elasticsearch will be open to everybody without authorization. Please monitor it. Use SearchGuard which is free and allows you to set up. To wrap up, let's say that we should always see a whole picture of the things that are going on in your infrastructure, to discover what's going on and what you have. You should decompose it to smaller layers, analyze the risks on each layer, and you should do it in a cyclic way, in a cyclic mode, every time you change anything in your environment. And please educate and share knowledge. Train your developers. Study these problems and processes yourself and try to make your product as good as possible. To understand your problems, you should also carry out penetration tests. And some things, some references supporting our opinion. These are the most interesting materials to support and secure your clusters. All right, now thank you for your attention. We ran short of time and we are now open to your questions.
Є питання?
Any questions on the floor? Yes.
У мене теж є питання.
because I have a question too.
Скажите, пожалуйста, вы относились бы к инициативе разработчиков
What would be your attitude to the DevOps, to developers for using Kubernetes KPI? Well, we can split the grants to provide just the necessary rights. It depends on API, but role-based access control can be used for this. So you think it's possible, but role-based access control should be used. Well, it depends on the components and where it should be used. Not on the production environment, but maybe in the development environment. If you have enough budget, finance, resources, you can also deploy your own Kubernetes cluster. How do you think, what is the best possible team to secure Kubernetes? It depends on the project, and it depends of whether or not the customer is ready and willing to pay for security. In ideal case, you should have a security engineer in your team, and if you lack finance to hire an engineer, before you deploy your project in production, you should carry out penetration tests. And if we have an ideal case, like a super security team in vacuum, all the budgets, no deadlines, well, the ideal case is to create a methodology and then use it with the resources you have. Actually, we are going to do it at our new workplace, and it may be even provided at open source.
Or in English this time. So you had quite
Якщо можна, я англійською.
Azure in AKS.
В ажурі МТС є
Restrict access.
цікаві можливості, але в інтернеті там нема при доступі через інтернет, там нема можливостей обмежити цей доступ. Чи знаєте ви про якісь проблеми, які вже були, про порушення безпеки? Ні, я не зовсім зрозумів, що ви питаєте. Давайте потім зустрінемося в кулуарах.
Ретімівське питання. От ви кажете, є можливість...
My question. If it's possible to go out of the Docker container and do get the root privileges at the host system or no root or what? Well, it depends on how the container runs. If there is no privilege flag, you are not going out of the container with the root access. But there are many configurations requiring to operate container with the root privileges. Or people just don't think about the privileges to limit, how to limit privileges not giving the root rights. So it's 50-50. Actually, some vulnerabilities become not relevant after the update, and in every single case you should think about getting root access on the host. Okay, let's thank our speakers. Thank you guys.